News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Karen Moscow.
And Karen, Boeing may be caught in the crosshairs of the U.S.-China trade war. Bloomberg News has learned China has ordered its airlines not to take any further deliveries of Boeing jets. And Bloomberg aviation reporter Danny Lee is following the story this morning.
This is really quite a blow for Boeing in the sense that we have seen more companies increasingly being caught up and caught in by this tit-for-tat trade war between Washington and Beijing. But increasingly where someone like Boeing is increasingly marginalized in such a thriving aviation market.
And Bloomberg aviation reporter Danny Lee says China is forecast to make up to 20% of global aircraft demand over the next 2 decades. And in 2018, nearly a quarter of Boeing's output ended up there. Shares of Boeing this morning down 2.7% in early trading.
Well, John, President Trump's administration is pressing forward with plans to impose tariffs on semiconductor and pharmaceutical imports by initiating trade probes led by the Commerce Department. And we get more on that with Bloomberg's trade czar, Brendan Murray.
The Trump administration wants semiconductors to be made in the U.S. rather than in Asia, mostly in Asia, in places like Taiwan and China. This is going to be especially important with the next generation of chips, the ones that power artificial intelligence. The other issue, and this is one that came up during the pandemic, was the drugs production and the pharmaceutical issue. Both of these are, the Trump administration is seeking to ground them in the legal rationale of national security.
And Bloomberg trade czar Brendan Murray says President Trump is also floating a potential pause in auto tariffs, and that has shares of Nissan, Toyota, and other auto stocks on the rise this morning.
And Karen, the near daily flow of tariff announcements adding to the confusion for companies and countries trying to navigate President Trump's evolving trade policies. Speaking exclusively to Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, was asked how many of these deals he expects to have signed by the end of the pause.
I think there will be advantage to our allies, especially, and a first mover advantage. Usually the first person who makes the deal gets the best deal. So
who do you think will be first?
It's their choice.
Is there a handful of countries that you expect to have a deal before the 90 days is up?
Oh, I think there could be numerous countries. And look, it may not be the actual trade document, but we will have agreement in principle and be able to move forward from there.
Treasury Secretary Bessent also playing down the recent sell-off in the bond market, rejecting speculation that foreign nations were dumping their holdings, while flagging that his department has the tools to address dislocation if needed. And you can hear the full conversation on the Bloomberg Talks podcast feed or watch it on the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube.
Well, John, former Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is criticizing the Trump administration's trade policy. She says the entire approach is muddled.
The objectives unclear, the rationale for the tariffs that have been announced really unclear and not at all sensible. Steps toward removing the tariffs, lowering them are positive, but we're in a world of tremendous uncertainty.
Despite uncertainties, Yellen told Bloomberg's Balance of Power the U.S. economy is still strong and does not see a need for central bank intervention.
And another major story we're following this morning, Harvard University fighting back against President Trump's demands for what he calls reforms at the school. Let's get details this morning from Bloomberg's Lisa Mateo. Lisa, good morning.
Good morning, John. The university's president, Alan Garber, says that the requests pose threats to academic freedom and also interfere in higher education. A government task force on anti-Semitism, well, they responded saying it plans to freeze $2.2 billion of multi-year grants, which could impact the school's research, medicine, public health programs. U.S. agencies, well, they've previously said they're reviewing about $9 billion of Harvard's grants and contracts. And the university's rejection of the demands, it's winning the support from Democratic lawmakers, alumni, including former President Barack Obama. Now, already the government has canceled $400 million in funding to Columbia University. They've paused funds to Northwestern and Cornell and suspended money for Princeton, claiming that they're not doing enough to fight anti-Semitism on campus. Now, unlike those institutions, however, Harvard, the richest university with a $53 billion endowment. But the school does say about 70% of the annual distribution is restricted by donor terms to specific programs, departments, or purposes. Lisa Mateo, Bloomberg Radio.
And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg.